I claimed I was innocent, but I've been secretly meeting my ex at a remote desert retreat, which sounds like something you confess at the tail end of a detox, but here we are. My name's Sarah, I'm 32, and I'm a hydrologist who models groundwater flow for councils that think water is a personality trait they can negotiate with. By day I argue with sand about where it's hiding the lost drink, and by night I have been sneaking out to sit under skies so clear they make my phone feel like a toy. From a loud house I don't want to return to. The retreat isn't the fancy kind with lemon towels and gong baths. It's a scatter of low-slung adobe rooms crouched behind a ridgeline, a fractured horseshoe around a shallow dry pan that fills twice a year if the clouds remember their manners. The first time I went it was work, monitoring wells, checking the telemetry, explaining to a fresh counselor why numbers are not opinions, and the second time I went it was work adjacent in the way a long exhale is technically still breathing. I told my husband I'd be overnight because our equipment doesn't care about weekends. That was true. I didn't tell him that while the barometer sketched its little drama, my past had texted from a number that still knew my name. His name is Jonah. It always sounds like a decision, that name. He's 34 and used to be the sort of field engineer who could look at a dry river and tell you who lied to it. We met at 19 at a uni volunteer project planting saplings along a creek that resented our optimism. We broke at 26 when optimism ran out of protein. He wanted the kind of life that fits in a tray table, plane, field camp, another plane, while I wanted a fridge with leftovers and a partner who remembered bin night without a calendar reminder. We stuttered through 3 on-again seasons and a shared lease that ended with a chore chart turned evidence. Then I met Tom, who is a teacher with a patient back-row smile and a love of lists, and I told myself I'd filed Jonah in the drawer labeled Anthology of an Earlier Language. The desert is the sort of place that picks a lock you didn't know your body had. Heat sandpapers the unimportant off you. The horizon is a sentence that refuses to stop. I love it professionally first, the honesty of a sand column that doesn't care if you understand it, and then I love it in the way you love a saltine after a banquet of noise. The retreat has a long table under shade sails and a bell someone rings at sunset like a joke that still works. There's a tame jackrabbit who thinks it owns the path to the observation deck. The rooms have evaporative coolers that sigh like late-night jazz. If you walk 5 minutes past the last hut, you can lie down on your back and listen to the ground remember ocean. Are you still there? Jonah wrote the week I was due to recalibrate the data loggers. I stared at the message and the kettle decided to boil from shock alone. There could be anywhere. He meant the ridge. He meant the air that used to make us behave. I typed back sometimes and turned the burner off with the kind of care you use for old promises. He didn't ask for more. He never did when he wanted everything. Tom trusts me. That's the part the story keeps bumping into. He's good at it, like other men are good at reversing trailers. He makes it look showy and necessary. He teaches 11-year-olds grammar without humiliating them, which is a kind of gentle power, and when he washes up he hums the same 4 notes and our cat chooses his lap even when I bribe with cheese. We have dinner on the balcony some nights and pretend to know birds. We share sunscreen and playlists and a hatred of performative decor. He asks me about my models like he's nosy about hydrological head instead of humoring me. There is nothing wrong with my marriage except the part of me that insists on being auditioned by hunger. The first time I saw Jonah again, I was inventorying filters in the shed. My hands were labeled in pencil, the way field hands always are. He stood in the doorway with the sun crashing around his shoulders like old news. Time had squared his jaw and softened his eyes. He looked like a before and after sharing the same body. Sarah, he said, and it felt like my name had worn out a hinge and someone had finally oiled it. I laughed at myself for letting that happen. We did the sensible thing. We walked to the ridge with our hands on separate straps of our packs and talked about nothing as if nothing hadn't been a lover once. He asked about the models and I said, still trying to keep the town from drinking more than the aquifer can miss. He said he was working a drought resilience contract up north, mostly spreadsheets with dust under their nails. We stood shoulder-width apart and watched the long shadow of the day pour itself into the pan. He didn't touch me. I didn't ask. We have always been good at rehearsals. At night the retreat's lights are few and low. You move by memory and a small torch that stutters against moths. We sat on the steps outside the empty classroom hut with mugs of too hot tea, and we did the slow inventory people do when they are trying to describe what didn't kill them. His father had a heart thing. My mother had started calling me the sensible one again, which is how she punishes me for becoming less needy. He tried living in a city with trams and grew a plant that died because it missed wind. I tried a Pilates class and sneezed at the mats. Somewhere a coyote tested a theory about distance. Somewhere our old version of us checked its watch. I did not cheat that night. My body was a house with the deadbolt on and the windows cracked enough to hear leaves imagine rain. I went to my room and lay on the bed and let the cooler's breath do that lulling thing it does to the part of my brain that misuses lists. At 4:11 a.m., I woke and dressed like a thief and walked out to the dry pan and lay on my back and counted satellites like a kid who wants to make time jealous. At 4:23, footsteps. Not coyotes. Not weather. I figured you'd be here, he said, lying down a meter away so we could be 2 stations on the same line. Don't, I said, in a way that asked him to keep talking. Okay, he said, in a way that meant he wouldn't kiss me first. When I got home, Tom had made a stew that tasted like he'd read the pantry's mind. He asked if my wells behaved. I said the youngest one needed attention. I kissed him longer than I meant to because Shame is a good sprinter but a terrible marathoner. I showered with the shampoo that makes my hair smell like citrus dignity. I put my field notebook on the table so my life would look linear. The cat considered my ankles and forgave me for being elsewhere again. The next month, I built myself a schedule that looked like professionalism and felt like a path worn into the desert by desire. I took an extra telemetry unit because I wanted an excuse to go back unexpectedly. I swapped a Friday for a Monday so my absence would be quiet. I told myself nothing was happening. I told myself lying is an action and not saying is a different species of animal I was only putting in a temporary enclosure. I packed sunscreen with an obscene SPF and a book of poems about wind that I never opened. We didn't arrange it, not directly. We never said meet. It was a rumor we both fed carefully with small practicalities. He had to pass through the basin on his way to a new survey. I had to verify rainfall totals that looked like a typist's mistake. We nodded at no one present and did our jobs, and then at the far edge of the afternoon we wandered in the same direction and found ourselves at the old bent mesquite where we used to hang our hats. Touch happened like weather, inevitable, deniable. He reached toward a curl that had escaped my cap. I leaned toward the absent-minded gesture like a woman who wanted someone to remember her head had softness where math usually lived. The kiss was not dramatic. It was a retrieval. When it ended, we stood very still and pretended we were 2 colleagues organizing a bench. You want me to be a villain or a victim? I am the thing that ruins that binary, a human who knows better and wanted anyway. I kept showing up. The desert kept allowing it the way a casino allows mistakes because mistakes are the business model. We built routines that hid inside other routines. Walking after dinner to check the stars, sitting at the far end of the observation deck like we were cataloging a whole other kind of light. He brought a pocket knife he used to whittle a stick into nothing slowly while we talked about the version of love we always respected, the maintenance kind, the soup on Wednesdays kind, and how both of us had built it and both of us still missed the echo of our younger urge to be ruined a little. He never asked me to leave Tom. I never asked him to build a house with fewer doors. We were not brave, we were accurate about our cowardice. Desert time cheats. Days look like stamps lined up politely, nights balloon and knock against the tent of the sky until you think something must split. At the retreat there's a tiny library in a cool room with 3 mismatched armchairs. Someone had left a field guide to desert varnish, the dark glaze on rocks that takes centuries, and I read it like a devotional. Manganese, iron, clay, time, wind. It forms only in clean air. You have to leave a rock alone for a long time to earn it. I underlined a line that wasn't bold and wanted to be. Silence is an ingredient. Later, lying next to him in that library on the rug that always smells faintly of rosemary and dust, I put the book between us like a mediator. What are we doing? I asked the varnish. Depositing thin layers, he said, reading upside down. Not helpful, I said, laughing, because joking is how I keep from telling the truth in public. The closest I came to being caught was a scent. Tom knows my smells the same way I know the small bleached patch in his hair that appears each summer like a dandelion pretending to be a highlight. He leaned into my neck one night and paused. "You smell like sun," he murmured, and I went rigid the way a lizard goes rigid when the hawk's shadow moves. "Evap cooler," I said too fast, and he kissed my shoulder and said, "Lucky," and rolled over, and I lay awake tracing lines on the ceiling like a hydrological map of a gilt flood. At work, my models got better. There's the cruelty. I could see the aquifer's story more clearly because I was reading my own. Where are the inputs, how deep the storage, what are the losses, what looks like recharge but is only a mirage of bookkeeping. I presented to counsel with that rare confidence that isn't performance, it's when your brain and your mouth get along. After, a farmer with hands like weather shook mine and said, "You talk like someone who knows the water personally," and I thought I do, and also I'm sleeping with my past, and I smiled like a responsible adult and said something respectable about isotopes. There was a storm in month 4 of the lie. The kind of desert storm that seems like a rumor until the sky shows teeth. The wind hit the sails and the bell flew off its hook and the jackrabbit made a choice I'd never seen it make, bolted into a hut like a sin looking for shelter. We stayed in the classroom hut with the bad whiteboard and the map of the basin, and I taught him a game I used to calm children on community visits. Name the sounds you can hear that aren't the thing. Cooler clicking. Door frame complaining. The storm calling itself important. We waited while the rain tried to make a river out of a rumor. When it passed, the pan had a skin of brown glass, and we walked out in bare feet because shoes seemed like a kind of lie. I took a sample because I didn't know how not to. He took my hand because he didn't know how not to. The water was warm. The air was confessional. I forgive us for that hour. I don't forgive what we did with the hour after, how we decided to believe the storm meant anything about permission. I kept telling myself the desert is a place, not an argument. Then I kept arguing with it anyway. The problem with being a scientist is you think you can audit your heart. The problem with being a person is you can't. I started writing 2 notebooks, field and field. One held numbers and coordinates and the kind of abbreviations that make technicians feel like they're in a club. The other held sentences that read like I was trying to invoice time. I crave being seen in a way that doesn't require me to be tidy. I want the sky of 19 and the kitchen of 32. I am a good girl who set down one rule and accidentally built a path to a door. I hid the second notebook inside the first because I am too on the nose for fiction. The conversation with Tom happened on a Tuesday that had no business being brave. He set down his bag, took off his shoes, looked at the basil plant, and asked me if the retreat had good coffee. You know those questions that announce themselves as choreography? I said something about long blacks poured by people who listen to the machine like it's an instrument. He nodded and then, "Are you seeing him there?" It wasn't a question. It was a rescue rope flung with zero theatrics. I sat on the bench and put my hands on my thighs and looked at my knees like they might lie for me, which is how I knew I had to stop asking for accomplices. "Yes," I said. I am not going to make the sentence prettier. He closed his eyes and then opened them and none of the furniture had moved. The cat looked at me with her usual monarchy. "Since when?" he said, practical as a ledger. "Since winter," I said. He swallowed. He is not a man who likes to hear that time has been misfiled. "Do you love him?" he asked, like he was testing my language for leaks. "I don't know." The truest answer. "I love the version of me who thinks in long lines and silence and not in checklists," I said, which is therapists speak for, "I forgot how to be messy with you." He nodded the way people nod when they've located a tooth with their tongue and know a dentist will be involved. We did not break that night. We did dishes. He went for a run he didn't announce. I cleaned the stovetop like I was trying to polish a lie. Then we sat on the balcony and he said, "I don't want to punish you. But I also don't want to pretend this is something that just happened to us." I said, "It didn't. I did it." The moon was bad at metaphors that night. It looked like a flashlight with low batteries. He said, "Do you want to stay?" And I said, "Yes, because the best part of this whole sorry song is that I do." I told Jonah the next time and last time I saw him at the retreat. The desert smelled like wet rock from a pettiness of rain, the kind that only manages to annoy the dust. We stood by the bent mesquite and I said, he asked me to decide out loud. I decided here's not where I get to keep cheating on consequence. Jonah put his hands in his pockets like a man waiting for a bus he knows will not come. I won't fight you for your life, he said. If I ever get to love you again, I want it to be when nothing is secret. We looked at one another the way people look at old furniture, fond, a little embarrassed by the scratches they made. We didn't kiss goodbye because we are not teenagers and because sometimes dignity is just a choreography you do for yourself. After that, the desert was still the desert. It didn't withhold sunsets to punish me. It didn't photograph my shame. I went back for work and did my job. I sat on the observation deck and didn't ask the horizon to behave like a priest. I slept alone in a room that smelled like evaporative coolness and lizards that would prefer if you left. I texted Tom a photo of the pan, dry, honest, and he texted back a photo of the basil, thriving, smug. We began the kind of repair that doesn't look good on television. His conditions were small and hard, total honesty going forward even when it makes the soup go cold, less travel for a while, therapy where we sit on chairs that were never meant for tall men and tell a stranger about our most domesticated failures. My conditions were small and hard, permission to be less impressive, a weekly hour where no one asks me to explain anything, dinner on the floor sometimes like students. I wrote Jonah a letter I didn't send. In it I told him the Rock Varnish line. Silence is an ingredient. I told him I was going to try to let time do its slow chemistry on me instead of scratching at everything with a key. I folded the letter and tucked it into the back of my second notebook, the one that tells the truth in a handwriting that gets worse when I lie. I read it once a month and then I do the laundry and resist checking pockets for ghosts. Sometimes, when the city presses all its buttons at once, I drive out to a little patch of sand beside the motorway where no one parks because there's nothing to look at. I park anyway. I roll the window down and listen to the hum of collective urgency and I imagine a ridge I can't see. I let my breath lengthen the way my models lengthen a storm into a curve. I call Tom and ask him what he wants for dinner and he says soup and then we both laugh because soup is our shorthand for the maintenance kind. I go home and we chop and the cat pretends she doesn't care and when we sit we say one true thing each before we lift our spoons so that even if the day becomes a courtroom we have already filed our openers. The desert retreat still sends me emails when the pan fills. Rare event, the subject line will say, as if rarity guarantees virtue. I forward it to Tom with the note, want to go with me, and he writes, yes, because he is not scared of my ghosts if I invite him to watch them evaporate. We haven't gone yet, work is feral and the cat has taken up new hobbies involving knocking pens off counters, but we will. I want him to hear the bell, feel the air that makes you tidy without moralizing, see the way the dry lake looks like a lie and then becomes a mirror for 10 hours. I want to watch his teacher's face practice or I want to be boring with him under a ridiculous sky. I claimed I was innocent. I wasn't. I was complicated and lonely and vain about my competence. I told myself a story about longing that excused cowardice. I walked out past the last hut and lay down and borrowed the horizon like a prop. And then I did the least cinematic thing, I told on myself and didn't implode. I am not noble now. I am not fixed. I am a woman who checks her own pockets for keys, who writes the right numbers on the right lines, who asks for soup more often, who texts fewer postcards to the past, who tries to move the mess into rooms where it can see the light. If you need a moral, I offer you 2 unmarketable ones. First, arid places are honest because they force ranking, need before want, shade before beauty, water before poetics. I am trying to do that at home. Second, silence isn't just what's missing, it's sometimes the only material that can hold a shape. There is a quiet now in my kitchen around 9 p.m. after dishes before bed when Tom hums a soft nothing and the basil leans toward the last reliable lamp, and I sit with my elbows on the table and do not narrate myself to a man who knows my old songs but to the man who is here who passes me the salt who says, best minute, and waits while I decide whether to tell him about the jackrabbit that used to own the path or the way tonight's onions finally caramelize like patience, which is, I am learning, a kind of weather you can stand in together until the whole sky changes without a single trumpet.